So yeah, his much more level-headed wife, the servants wind up, or shepherds or whoever, wind up going to her and being like, okay, look, this dude David, who's been nice to us, was trying to extend greetings, maybe ask a little bit of a favor from Nabal, but Nabal's such a hothead that he just yelled at the guys, and he might be getting us into trouble here. Can you figure something out? Maybe smooth this over? What's up, cool people? My name's Matt. Welcome back to our Bible study. Alrighty, so we're looking at 1 Samuel 25 now. Context to what's going on. So we've got David and Saul are kind of the main people for the past few chapters. Saul is the current reigning king of Israel, but he did some things God didn't like, fell from God's favor, so God also anointed David to be the next king. David has been very successful in his endeavors, including as like a commander. And so basically, because he's been getting praised for all that he's been doing, even more so than Saul, like, is kind of jealous of him and or worried that David's going to take over his throne by force. But, so, after a while of Saul trying to capture and kill David and being unsuccessful, he had to divert his attention from that to go fight the Philistines. That was kind of what happened at near the end of the last chapter. So, that's kind of where we find ourselves now, presumably in the midst of Saul fighting the Philistines. But anyway, let's see what develops here in 1 Samuel chapter 25. Now Samuel died, and all Israel gathered for his funeral. They buried him at his house in Ramah. Then David moved down to the wilderness of Maon. There was a wealthy man from Maon who owned property near the town of Carmel. He had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats, and it was sheep shearing time. This man's name was Nabal, and his wife Abigail was a sensible and beautiful woman. But Nabal, a descendant of Caleb, was crude and mean in all his dealings. Okay, it mentioned David going to Maon in the previous chapter, so I guess maybe in the midst of Saul chasing David around, Samuel died. You know, the actual namesake of the book, because the book of 1 Samuel actually starts off kind of focused on Samuel and how he's, in a way, like the last judge of Israel before they had kings. And even all this time, through all this craziness with Saul and David, he has still been a go-to, man of wisdom in Israel. So he was well known and rather beloved, which is why you would have all Israel gathering for his funeral. But anyway, so then David's in Maon. Apparently there's a guy there that has plenty of sheep. We'll get to how that relates later on, I guess. I assume David's going to have some dealings with him. Footnote here, as in the Greek version, Hebrew reads Paran instead of Maon. Okay, now we had the desert or wilderness of Paran was something that came up back in like Moses' time. I'm pretty sure it was in the midst of the like 40 years of wandering before entering the Promised Land. So I guess maybe that region is roughly where David is now. So this would probably be, like, kind of south of modern-day Israel. Pretty much right around that, like, peninsula area, if that makes any sense. But anyway. Exact location, still tough to say. But I guess that would probably be somewhere in the realm of modern day, like Saudi Arabia? Something like that? I don't know for sure. But anyway, okay, enough about that. We got a slightly longer than normal chapter to go through, so let's keep moving. On to verse 4. When David heard that Nabal was shearing his sheep, he sent 10 of his young men to Carmel with this message for Nabal. Peace and prosperity to you, your family, and everything you own. I am told that it is sheep shearing time. While your shepherds stayed among us near Carmel, we never harmed them, and nothing was ever stolen from them. Ask your own men, and they will tell you this is true. So would you be kind to us, since we have come at time of celebration? Please share any provisions you might have on hand with us, and with your friend David. David's young men gave this message to Nabal in David's name, and they waited for a reply. Okay, so it sounds like David at least had some dealings with servants of Nabal or workers of his, or maybe shepherds that he oversaw. But anyway, David's basically trying to say to him, hey, look, I've had some dealings with your people. We've been nice so far. Just a friendly request. Would you mind please maybe giving us some sort of provision, some sort of food or supplies or whatever you might have? Yeah, it's pretty self-explanatory in there. On to verse 10. Who is this fellow David? Nabal sneered to the young men. Who does this son of Jesse think he is? There are lots of servants these days who run away from their masters. Should I take my bread and my water and my meat that I've slaughtered for my shearers and give it to a band of outlaws who come from who knows where? So David's young men returned and told him what Nabal had said. Get your swords, was David's reply, as he strapped on his own. Then 400 men started off with David, and 200 remained behind to guard their equipment. So, that might seem a little drastic, but, like, it's a pretty significant insult that Nabal has here. Like, you would think he, you know, since, assuming David's telling the truth about having all these dealings with his shepherds and being kind to them and whatnot, that, you know, Nabal would have had some sort of idea of David, who he was, what kind of man he was. But he acts like David's just an outlaw and a thug, basically. Which, does that justify violence? Not necessarily. Maybe they're just going there as a way of trying a little harder to convince without maybe actually fighting. Doesn't quite seem like the case, but before I pass judgment on the reaction from David here, let's read on and see what else happens. Verse 14. Meanwhile, one of Nabal's servants went to Abigail and told her, David sent messengers from the wilderness to greet our master, but he screamed insults at them. These men have been very good to us, and we never suffered any harm from them. Nothing was stolen from us the whole time they were with us. In fact, day and night they were like a wall of protection to us and the sheep. You need to know this and figure out what to do, for there is going to be trouble for our master and his whole family. He's so ill-tempered that no one can even talk to him. So, Abigail, the more level-headed wife of Nabal, at least I think it said she was his wife. His wife, Abigail, yeah. So yeah, his much more level-headed wife, the servants wind up, or shepherds or whoever, wind up going to her and being like, okay, look, this dude David, who's been nice to us, was trying to extend greetings, maybe ask a little bit of a favor from Nabal, but Nabal's such a hothead that he just yelled at the guys, and he might be getting us into trouble here. Can you figure something out? Maybe smooth this over? So then, verse 18. Abigail wasted no time. She quickly gathered 200 loaves of bread, 2 wineskins full of wine, 5 sheep that had been slaughtered, nearly a bushel of roasted grain, 100 clusters of raisins, and 200 fig cakes. She packed them on donkeys and said to her servants, "Go on ahead, I will follow you shortly." But she didn't tell her husband Nabal what she was doing. As she was riding her donkey into a mountain ravine, she saw David and his men coming toward her. David had just been saying, "A lot of good it did to help this fellow. We protected his flocks in the wilderness, and nothing he owned was lost or stolen. But he has repaid me evil for good. May God strike me and kill me if even one man of his household is still alive tomorrow morning." That sounds a little more brash, almost a Saul type saying. So maybe the sheer words that we read from Nabal before didn't quite communicate the extent of Nabal's hostility here. So perhaps, that even just further exacerbated the situation and caused a desire within David to get some revenge, or at least, try and get something from Nabal after all this. Because he's been helping Nabal's men all this time, as he said. And just gets verbally spat in his face the second he tries to ask a favor. So anyway, Abigail gathers all this stuff, seemingly to try and give it to David and his men. Nearly a bushel, Hebrew says 5 seahs of roasted grain. Roughly 36.5 liters is the estimated, modern unit measurement, which is quite a lot. A bit odd using a liquid measure for a dry good, but still quite a lot in any case. All this stuff was. In fact, there were enough loaves of bread and fig cakes alone for each of the men with David to get half of one of those. And then there's the other stuff. Anyway, footnote here where David's saying, "May God strike me and kill me," says that's as in the Greek version. The Hebrew reads, "May God strike and kill the enemies of David." Okay, that seems a little less Saul-like. Saul is much more brash with his oaths and such, being basically putting a curse of death upon himself if such and such things don't happen. David saying, "May God strike and kill the enemies of David," is a not quite to that extent. It's more of a alright, it's more just him being kind of angry at the situation rather than being so hot-headed and ill-tempered, not even thinking about it, that he essentially wishes death upon himself if he doesn't get revenge. Okay. Let's move along to verse 23 here. When Abigail saw David, she quickly got off her donkey and bowed low before him. She fell at his feet and said, I accept all blame in this matter, my lord. Please listen to what I have to say. I know Nabal is a wicked and ill-tempered man. Please don't pay any attention to him. He's a fool, just as his name suggests. But I never even saw the young men you sent. Now, my lord, as surely as the Lord lives, and you yourself live, since the Lord has kept you from murdering and taking vengeance into your own hands, let all your enemies and those who try to harm you be as cursed as Nabal is. And here is a present that I, your servant, have brought to you and your young men. Please forgive me if I have offended you in any way. The Lord will surely reward you with a lasting dynasty, for you are fighting the Lord's battles, and you have not done wrong throughout your entire life. Alright, going to pause there. Let's the footnote up here. The name Nabal means fool. Okay. See, that kind of situation is where having an explanation of the Hebrew names is really helpful. Because the dude's literally called fool. That's his name, essentially. So, of course, he's going to be, like, brash, reckless, unthinking, uncaring. And not have the proper response to David's men. So, Abigail is definitely trying to smooth things over here. And is clearly more level-headed. Now, it's unclear how much she knows of or has heard before about David and what he has done. So either she knows some of these things and that's kind of prompting her statements in verse 28 here. If not, it's said probably more as like a blessing then. But I mean, clearly she at least knows enough about David to know that he and his men have done nothing wrong to them. So, yeah. Anyway, she has a much better response and is perhaps trying to overcompensate for Nabal a little bit. Anyway, verse 29. This is still Abigail speaking. Even when you are chased by those who seek to kill you, your life is safe in the care of the Lord your God, secure in his treasure pouch. But the lives of your enemies will disappear like stones shot from a sling. When the Lord has done all he promised and has made you leader of Israel, don't let this be a blemish on your record. Then your conscience won't have to bear the staggering burden of needless bloodshed and vengeance. And when the Lord has done these great things for you, please remember me, your servant. So, that really makes me think she's heard quite a bit about David. The fact that she specifically makes the analogy of stones shot from a sling. I mean, that's literally how David brought down Goliath, with a sling and a stone. So, David would have been super familiar with how quickly a stone can get shot out of a sling and just seem to just whoo off into the distance if it doesn't actually like hit a target, or sometimes even if it does and gets like lodged in the target. So The fact that she makes that specific analogy has me thinking she's heard quite a bit about David. Which, I guess, is fair enough, because, I mean, he had a high position in Saul's armies as a commander, and people all around Israel were singing his praises about his military victories. So it's not really that surprising that she would know a fair bit about David. So she is essentially beseeching him to change his mind and kind of turning it in a way to make it seem like it's for his own sake, so that he doesn't need to have, you know, a guilty conscience from this later on. Because, I mean, I did say before, it seemed like somewhat of a drastic response to say, alright, let's go kill this guy who's being unkind to us. Maybe Abigail's trying to appeal to that a little bit and say, alright, let's hold our horses here. Yeah, sure, Nabal's a hothead and a fool, as his name implies, but let's not overreact here and do something we'll regret later. Okay, then we get to verse 32. David replied to Abigail, "Praise the Lord, the God of Israel, who has sent you to meet me today. Thank God for your good sense. Bless you for keeping me from murder and from carrying out vengeance with my own hands. For I swear by the Lord, the God of Israel, who has kept me from hurting you, that if you had not hurried out to meet me, not one of Nabal's men would still be alive tomorrow morning." Then David accepted her present and told her, "Return home in peace. I have heard what you said. We will not kill your husband." When Abigail arrived home, she found that Nabal was throwing a big party and was celebrating like a king. He was very drunk, so she didn't tell him anything about her meeting with David until dawn the next day. In the morning, when Nabal was sober, his wife told him what had happened. As a result, he had a stroke, and he lay paralyzed on his bed like a stone. About 10 days later, the Lord struck him, and he died. Okay. He had a stroke. I get the sense, you know, since the verse says as a result, I get the sense that he got like really mad about all that, and that was what caused the stroke, or at least what you know, brought about the major impact, the main instance of it. But David hasn't killed anybody as a result of this. Nabal just ends up dying by other means. Footnote there. Hebrews says his heart failed him. Okay, so not necessarily a stroke. I mean, the way that reads, it could have almost been more like a heart attack. But in any case, not great circulatory system. Basically, that's given out on him. So, yeah. It almost makes me wonder how differently he might have reacted if she said it while he was still drunk. But she was probably just not wanting to, you know, interrupt the good time that he was having. So, and then we get down here to verse 39. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, "Praise the Lord who has avenged the insult I received from Nabal and has kept me from doing it myself. Nabal has received the punishment for his sin." Then David sent messengers to Abigail to ask her to become his wife. When the messengers arrived at Carmel, they told Abigail, David has sent us to take you back to marry him. She bowed low to the ground and responded, I, your servant, would be happy to marry David. I would even be willing to become a slave, washing the feet of his servants. Quickly getting ready, she took along 5 of her servant girls as attendants, mounted her donkey, and went with David's messengers. And so she became his wife. David also married Ahinoam from Jezreel, making both of them his wives. Saul, meanwhile, had given his daughter Michal, David's wife, to a man from Galim named Palti, son of Laish. So, yeah, that's all a little weird for our modern day context. Most of us think, well, shouldn't a man just have one wife? And yeah, I mean, polygamy was something that happened in the Old Testament. It was a common practice, not just of God's people, but of pretty much all people in those days. That's not saying that it's okay, because as there are countless examples of, well, I mean, they probably can be counted, but as there are multiple examples in the Old Testament in particular, most of the multi-wife situations wind up kind of causing some sort of trouble, or at least household conflict eventually. But in any case, like, also the fact that Saul pretty much said that his daughter was going to marry another man, despite having previously been married to David. I mean, that could have just been another way of Saul trying to get, trying to, you know, get even with, or just take out his anger on David. So, I mean, you know, there's also, realistically, there's not really any telling, as David's out in the wilderness, what might happen to him at any given moment. We don't know exactly what the situation was, I'm going to air quote, back home with Michal, and what all she might have thought about what all was going on. For all we know, it's been so long since she's seen David that she might believe he's dead. But, and David also doesn't really potentially know what's going on, you know, back with Michal and any children that they had. Again, I'm not excusing it. It's something that happened in that time. Polygamy, not recommended. As those awkward, even kind of tense situations in the Old Testament generally end up making pretty clear. So, yeah. But in any case, I mean, David clearly, you know, respected Abigail and all that she did for him and his servants. So, anyway, I guess the end result of this whole story is that Nabal's dead, which left Abigail as a widow, except for David heard about it, and David's like, okay, well, rather than have her as a widow, she seems like an honorable woman. I'll marry her if she's willing. Because there were also kind of standards of, like, you know, trying to help out widows, not leave them in a bad spot. And sometimes they did that back in those times through marriage. And then it just also turns out that there's some other woman from Jezreel that he marries too. But that's kind of a relatively small note in amongst the whole situation. Anyway, okay. So I guess that wraps things up for 1 Samuel chapter 25. Okay, so David has this whole Nabal situation going on. Oh, yeah, also, Samuel died. It makes me wonder how much 2 Samuel was actually about Samuel. I honestly can't recall at this exact moment. Been a little while since I've read through that. But anyway, so David's got this whole thing with Nabal. Dude's just kind of dumb and hot-headed. Eventually dies. But long story short, David now has Abigail as his wife, and another woman, but it does make me wonder, specifically in the case of Abigail, because of this, prolonged story and a more significant, or at least seemingly significant interaction, that maybe Abigail is going to play some sort of part in some eventual happenings with David and his family or other things like that, but I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see what happens. But that's all we got for now. So, as always, like and share if you enjoyed the video, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell if you're on YouTube to get updates when I post new videos. If you're seeing this on Rumble or anywhere else, give me a follow or whatever you need to do for that platform. Also, look down in the description to get info on other social media pages and different places to find and follow my activity. And leave comments down below all that with any thoughts you have. So that's going to do it for now. Hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I'll see you soon for another video. But whatever the case is, till next time, stay cool, people.